Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Washington Brief for Tuesday, June 3rd, 2025. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Michael Jenkins, President of the Washington Times Foundation, which sponsors this webcast. Dr. Jenkins is also President of the Washington Times Holdings, the LLC that owns the Times News Organization. He has led many successful fact-finding trips to Korea for policy experts and peace initiatives to the Middle East for the Universal Peace Federation. Dr. Jenkins, welcome.
Thank you, Larry. We're going to talk today about the Korea presidential election. Amid polarization and uncertainty, everything is on the line. We have a very wonderful expert guest panelist, Dr. Patrick Cronin, is Asia Pacific Security Chair at the Hudson Institute. Dr. Cronin's research program analyzes the challenges and opportunities confronting the United States in the Indo-Pacific region. And he analyzes the challenges and opportunities, including China and the other aspects of Asia, the future of the Korean Peninsula, and strengthening U.S. alliances. Dr. Cronin was previously Senior Advisor and Senior Director of the Asia Pacific Security Program at the Center for a New American Security, and before that, Senior Director of the Institute for National Strategic Studies at the National Defense University, where he simultaneously oversaw the Center for the Study of Chinese Military Affairs. He was awarded the Army's Meritorious Civilian Service Award for his work at the National Defense University. Dr. Cronin has a rich and very diverse background in both Asia-Pacific security and U.S. defense and foreign and development policy. You have seen his work at the London-based International Institute for Strategic Studies. He was also Senior Vice President and Director of Research at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS, in Washington. His work covering Asia and long-range security issues has put him in leadership positions in research and policy development at the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, the U.S. Institute for Peace as a senior analyst at the Center for Naval Analyses, and as a U.S. Naval Reserve Intelligence Officer. Dr. Cronin has taught at Georgetown University Security Studies programs and Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. He regularly publishes essays and leading publications. Our resident analyst and panelist is Dr. Alexandre Mansourov, a very highly respected scholar in the area of security and intel, and especially an expert on Northeast Asia. He's adjunct professor of security studies at the Edmund A. Walsh School of Foreign Service at Georgetown. He's also the adjunct professor of Korean studies at the School of Advanced International Studies at Johns Hopkins. Our moderator is Ambassador Joseph DeTrani. Ambassador DeTrani is a commentator on security issues. Formerly, Ambassador DeTrani was a special envoy for the six-party talks with North Korea and the other four nations in participation, the director of the National Counterproliferation Center and associate director of national intelligence. Ambassador DeTrani is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, and he also is supporting one of the team members of a new initiative by the Washington Times called Threat Status, where key people are interviewed, and also video news is created, both in print and video. And Joe's playing a key role there as one of our editorial experts. We thank you all. Welcome, Ambassador DeTrani. It's going to be a great program.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you. Very generous with your comments. You know, we're very fortunate today to have Dr. Patrick Cronin with us to talk about the elections in South Korea. The polls are closed. We're recording this a few hours before the official announcement, but it looks very clear that Lee Jae-myung won very handily the presidential election in South Korea. What does this mean? What does this mean for international affairs? What does this mean for the relations between the ROK and the United States, between the ROK and Japan? What does it mean for the region? And the economic issues that are so pronounced. What does it mean for the people? Unemployment, jobs creation, the polarization that we see now in South Korea. Today, we are so fortunate to have Dr. Cronin with us. I can't think of anyone who knows the region and certainly knows the Korean Peninsula better than Dr. Cronin. So over to you, Dr. Cronin.
Ambassador DeTrani, thank you so much. It's a great pleasure to be here. This is a consequential election, even though it rhymes with what happened 8 years ago, almost exactly to the date. I mean, you had December 2016, you'll recall that was when Park Geun-hye was impeached. And then in May of 2017, Moon Jae-in, the liberal, was elected. And here today, we have the surprising impeachment of President Yoon last December, and now the election here on June 3rd, apparently, of Lee Jae-myung of the Democratic Party of Korea. And a lot of people are worried, especially in conservative circles, about this left-leaning government that will be coming to power. And it will be the first time that the Democratic Party, the Progressive, the Liberal Party, has both had the presidency and had the majority in the National Assembly, because that's where this latest political upheaval in South Korea really began. It began last April of 2024, when in the National Assembly election, the Democratic Party took the majority, won 170 of the 300 seats, and it made it really difficult for the People Power Party, the conservatives of President Yoon, to govern and to pass a budget or to fend off impeachment threats. And then that's what led to the martial law fiasco in December. That then caused the impeachment. And so here we are, hopefully putting a close to what is 6 months of political upheaval. I think we all agree that we need Korea to be vibrant and allowed to have a stable government that leads regardless of its political views. And so now we appear to finally have put an end to this 6 months of upheaval. So that's the good news. The bad news is that the new government gets formed on June 4th, literally the day after, because this is a special snap election, and it has a lot of challenges facing it, starting with reviving the economy, because the economy was already facing challenges, but it really had slowed down during this last 6 months of upheaval, and it's missing some of the engagement that it really needs to have with the new U.S. Government. In fact, we can recall after President Trump's re-election in November of last year, there was a very positive phone call, a congratulatory phone call from President Trump to President Yoon Suk-yeol. And it looked like the relationship was just going to continue to keep ascending in terms of U.S.-South Korean relations. They'd done very well under the Biden administration with President Yoon, and now they appear to be going to new levels with Trump. But now this creates a new dilemma. A new rapport will have to be built between the liberal, Lee Jae-myung, and President Trump. And he doesn't have a lot of time because, for instance, tariffs right now are currently threatening to sort of close down further on Korea. Hopefully that timeline can be extended, given the fact that you just have a brand new government coming in on June 3rd. But even without the immediate tariff deadline, there is the larger question of how does South Korea position itself as with the United States ally that really wants two big asks from South Korea. One of them is to essentially help America reindustrialize and put new barriers up, if not decoupling, at least major de-risking with China, that call into question the profits in the economics of South Korea. And then the other one is more burden shifting. So having this ally focus more on shouldering the burdens of South Korea's self-defense, including being willing to put pressure and to plan for potential contingencies against China. Lee Jae-myung does not want that. Lee Jae-myung has said, look, we want an ironclad alliance with the United States, so that's sort of the continuity of this government that'll be coming in. At the same time, he says we don't want to be making enemies with anybody. That's a very hard tightrope to walk, because obviously if you're going to be closely allied with the United States on security, you're going to be alienating North Korea, China, Russia. So how Lee Jae-myung's government manages that relationship is going to be crucial for the future of U.S. interests, the future of the Korean Peninsula, the future for the Korean people. So those are some of the issues. I think one of the concerns we have here, Joe, is the fact that Lee Jae-myung's government, coming after the martial law issue that was so divisive and brought a lot of more moderate voices to the left-leaning Democratic Party, which is why we have this electoral landslide essentially in South Korea, because the polls have been so evenly divided for years in this country, and yet here we have apparently maybe a 10% victory, 8 to 10% victory by the Democratic Party. And that's because they were, so many people were upset by the return, the image of the return to pre-democratic South Korea, back to the 1970s and 80s, thinking of martial law then. And that was an image that nobody wanted to go back to. It was a mistake. It was a terrible, tragic mistake. It ended a very successful foreign policy run for President Yoon, and it put South Korea into a different camp. If Lee Jae-myung pursues justice, and by that I mean revenge, if he goes too far with that, he's going to alienate a lot of people. He's going to play on the polarization. He's going to have to balance out his desire to kind of consolidate democracy and preserve democratic Korea's constitution and law without going too far and alienating and really deepening the polarization in the society. He's also going to have to balance out relations with China, because he wants to make sure that Korean investments, equity, trade with China are not completely decoupled, but continue, because it's the economic issue that is polling the highest of all the things that people went to the polls for. It wasn't martial law. It turns out it was actually the economy. People are very worried about the economy. So how you do that when you're worried about China's competition and you're worried about America's sort of challenge on tariffs and technology export controls, looking for more investment, looking for tighter supply chains, while they're doing security burden shifting and wanting to make sure we have strategic flexibility of our forces to be able to deal with Taiwan-China contingencies. So one area where they agree, I'll just end here maybe, is that President Trump has talked repeatedly since returning to power about his rapport with Kim Jong-un. And Kim Jong-un has done nothing to dispel the idea that he might be interested in talking to President Trump. Yes, right after the election, before the inauguration of President Trump, he put cold water on the idea of a near-term summit meeting, but he didn't really, since the inauguration, have anything critical to say about the possibility of listening to what the United States has to say about this. Lee Jae-myung wants that relationship to go forward. He wants President Trump to do what he can to ease tensions with the North. He just wants to make sure that South Korea is in the loop, that there's close coordination. Other issues on China, that's going to be a challenge to manage. Russia and trying to reset relations there, I think that's not the highest priority, but Lee Jae-myung wants to reset relations with all powers, including even Russia. Of course, even President Trump has wanted to do that, but as we see, 130 days into the administration's second term, it's been very difficult to try to reset a relationship where you have an ongoing war in Ukraine. I think I should stop there and we can pick it up with others.
Well, Patrick, there's so much to unpack with your comments, so thank you for sharing them. I mean, you talked about the Yoon Suk-yeol and the tragedy of the self-coup, attempted coup, and the economy in a significant way, tariffs from the United States, issues that Lee Jae-myung will have to confront almost immediately, I would say immediately. SMA, burden sharing, where it's the Republic of Korea is spending about $1 billion to support the 28,500 troops we have in South Korea, but is that enough? And the Trump administration is saying, no, that is not enough. There needs to be more. You talked about China, you talked about North Korea, you talked about the polarization in South Korea, what that means. All these are issues that are so profound and so important, and they have to be immediately addressed. So with that, over to you, Alexander. Let's start this very interesting conversation.
Thank you very much, Ambassador and Patrick. Again, congratulations on your excellent overview of the landscape in South Korea in the wake of this very consequential, I agree with you, very consequential presidential election. Although official results have not been announced, but it's clear, to me at least, that this was a landslide victory by the Democratic Party's candidate. Now, I wonder whether he'll be able to beat the historical record of the number of voters supporting the winner, which was established in 2017 when former President Park Geun-hye got almost 52% of the voters. Now, whether he'll get close to that or not remains to be seen, but clearly it's a landslide, and I'd like to congratulate President Lee with his election. What's interesting, so to me, there was no surprise in this election. We, just like most Koreans, 68% of South Koreans expected him to win. What was surprising, though, is that during the campaign, 30% of the polled voters said they would vote for the Democratic Party's candidate. 30% actually said they would vote for the People's Power Party candidate, the conservative, and almost 30% were undecided and 10% didn't answer. So 40% still didn't make up their mind going to the polls. And now we know how they voted. Most of them voted for the liberal candidate Lee, which to me suggests that the conservatives' elections campaign strategy of demonizing the opponent from the opposition party really backfired. When they began to call Lee Jae-myung as another Hitler, comparing him to Kim Jong-un, and predicting gloom and doom and the return to the dictatorship, that didn't really click with the voters who just had their lives turned upside down because of the declaration of the martial law by the conservative president, and so President Yoon, I mean. And so, whereas the Democratic Party clearly its focus on policy issues clicked with voters, and they basically delivered the verdict loud and clear today by giving the victory to Lee Jae-myung. Now, it's basically, many analysts, and I'm one of them, believe that policy priorities, speaking about President Lee's policy priorities, most likely his focus will be on the domestic issues. On the political side, and he talks a lot about bringing justice to the democratic system of South Korea. And I hope, just like Patrick does, that this will not turn into some revengeful campaign against his former opponents, including the impeached President Yoon. Also, he talks a lot about revitalizing the South Korean economy, which is facing a lot of pressure these days, not only from known issues, but even from its allies. Patrick talked about the tariff challenge, which they have to deal in the relationship with the United States. In my opinion, the foreign policy really will be of low priority for President Lee, and that's quite unfortunate because, again, the challenges are mounting, and you discussed some of them in the South Korean-US relationship, South Korean-China relationship. The need to kind of rethink South Korean approach to North Korea, to possibly even Japan. And in that sense, I'm just curious, and that's my question. When you talk to the people from Lee Jae-myung's camp, they often refer to what they call transformative or disruptive approach to foreign policy, which is going to be pursued by President Lee. I wonder whether you have any idea what exactly do they mean. I know President Lee is a rather pragmatic politician, and if anything, he seeks to find the new right balance in managing relations between South Korean ally, the United States, and of course the great neighbor to the north, that is China. Obviously, he is looking forward to opening a new chapter, what he believes in a relationship with North Korea by trying to re-engage the Kim regime, Kim Jong-un administration in the north, probably kind of reviving some aspects of sunshine policy, of DJ, peace and prosperity policy of Roh Moo-hyun, and Moon Jae-in's engagement policy with North Korea. But again, they talk about this transformative and disruptive approach. What exactly do they mean, and how significant do you think it is? Is it just rhetoric? Is it just words? Or is there any substance to it? And if it is, then what is it?
Well, it's a great question. I want to just say a few comments about some of your excellent comments on, for instance, demonization and sort of where the PPP went astray. They had a very short time for a primary essentially, and they chose essentially to back President Yoon, and therefore not to distance themselves very much from the martial law fiasco. And I think that was a mistake, and that led them down to this path of having to then double down on how bad the opposition was. The opposition has problems. Both parties have problems, but that was never going to be a winning argument, as we saw, I think, with these results. There's nothing new about demonization in Korean politics on both sides, liberal and conservative, but things have been pretty feisty right now. And so for President, for Lee Jae-myung to apparently emerge this time with about 50 or more % of the vote, when he lost narrowly the last election in 2022 to President Yoon, it shows that that people wanted to push away from demonization and get back to governing, and can they have those domestic issues addressed? So when the second question, is about then, can an Lee Jae-myung administration realistically transform foreign policy or any policy? Can any government, and a democratic government, successfully achieve transformation, even though we all aspire for better government? I think the answer is this is where the fight is in the Democratic Party of Korea, as opposed to all of Korea. So I think a lot of Koreans were very happy with the foreign policy in general, especially of a tight, positive alliance with the United States. There was more division over how close they wanted to get to Japan. That issue now feeds into the new Democratic Party of Korea's internal fights. And the National Assembly, they're more liberal than the more pragmatic Lee Jae-myung. So Lee Jae-myung will bring a more Trump-like, sense of pragmatism. That is, somebody who can pivot on policy more easily, whereas the National Assembly is sort of dug in on some of these issues. They really do want change and transformation. A lot of them want to go back to the idea of an equidistant foreign policy. And I think that's not going to go down well with Washington, with the Trump administration, obviously, but it's also going to be problematic even in Korean politics. I think Lee Jae-myung will continue to tack toward more the center, at least initially. We'll see. I mean, he'll keep his options open in his 5-year term, but I think he wants to make sure that he first consolidates the strong alliance that he's talked about, that he's committed to. He wants to even preserve the positive relationship with Japan during especially the 60th year of the normalization treaty between South Korea and Japan. It's a very important year in which to signal, can these two countries move forward rather than keep going backwards into history. Don't forget history, but move forward. And I think President Lee Jae-myung will want to do that. So he may be less interested in transformation in the sense that the liberals in the National Assembly, some of them may mean, but he does mean it relative to where the Yoon administration was. He doesn't want to see, for instance, the August 15 unification policy continue. That's far too hard line for the progressives, for the liberals, and for Lee Jae-myung as well. So they're going to rewrite whatever that means. And what it means is an open question, because North Korea has, of course, abandoned peaceful unification policy, has called South Korea a hostile state, the principal enemy. So there's some work to be done there. And North Korea gets a vote on a lot of these policy issues, just as China will get a vote, just as Washington will get a vote on what does South Korean policy look like going forward. And I think, so I think initially, if we go back to President Yoon in his inauguration back in 2022, I mean, he put a pretty extensive plan together. He wrote it very quickly. They put out an Indo-Pacific strategy, and it never mentioned China as an adversary. So even the conservatives were hedging their bets on trying to keep open the options while they were getting closer and closer to Washington, working very closely with the Biden administration, and certainly doing some unprecedented things in terms of cooperation with Japan bilaterally and trilaterally, and talking about a global pivotal state, kind of a global role. That was important because Moon Jae-in and the liberals in Korea tend to be inwardly focused on the inner Korean problem and the internal issues, domestic issues, whereas whereas President Yoon and a lot of conservatives really have tried to push out toward a global role, a bigger role. And I think Lee Jae-myung has indicated, at least on technology, he recognizes, like the conservatives, that this is a comparative advantage and it's a necessity. It's an existential threat, really, to South Korea's future prosperity and strength to make sure they're continuing to be competitive in key technological sectors. And he on the campaign trail, as short as it was, he was talking very much about things that sounded very conservative in terms of trying to make sure that they bolster those issues. He's talked about the Ironclad Alliance, but he also has made it very clear, not at the expense of good, stable relations with China or Russia. And those are going to be hard questions. You can say that in general, but in particular, what does it mean on a policy when you're confronted with pressure from Washington or pressure from Japan to take a certain stance on North Korea, on China, or on Russia? And we'll have to see.
Patrick, Alexander, thank you for the questions. Patrick, your comments are just right on target in my view. Let me, obviously, the domestic issues, the element of manufacturing, dealing with the tariffs, significant tariffs from the US, burden sharing, creating jobs for the significant number of unemployed in South Korea, housing issues. There's so many domestic issues, but let me pivot to the foreign affairs portfolio. We had our Secretary of Defense at the Shangri-La Dialogue talk about China as the adversary, China's goals in regards to Taiwan, and the ability to deter China from doing something that would be of a kinetic nature towards Taiwan. So I really think, and I'm going to pose this as a question to you, Patrick, I really think the issues in the Indochina region, especially China per se, will make it much more difficult for the Lee Jae-myung government to say we want a middle path. We want to keep China as the #1 trading partner, but we want the U.S. to be our national security, if you will, ally, and so forth. I'm not sure that that's going to be possible. I think South Korea is going to have to make a decision to be very supportive of the U.S. and its goals in the Indochina region, and certainly its goals in regards to China. But I do appreciate the necessity to balance that in regards to South Korea and China. But I think that's going to be so difficult. So do you see the U.S. in present terms, but also looking down the road, looking to the future, asking or suggesting that South Korea be more of an advocate for U.S. policy in Indochina, be more supportive of U.S. policy in regards to Taiwan and the South China Sea, and no longer sort of being in the middle, trying to accommodate both? How do you see the future in regards to U.S. policy towards South Korea?
Well, you put it very well. And the choices are difficult. It's going to be difficult to both be a close ally of the Trump administration's United States, which is wanting allies and partners to make clear that they're going to be sharing more burdens to deal with it, China competition and confrontation. As you say, Secretary Hegseth repeated constantly the phrase communist China, making it clear that they were the other side. And talking about the fact that force could be imminent, quote unquote, on say Taiwan. And while that's maybe not news breaking to anybody who's been watching the growing shift in military power and the potential use of coercion and possibly a blockade or even force, there is, in the region and at Shangri-La Dialogue itself, there's most countries are looking for maintaining maneuverability. So if they don't want multi-alignment or non-alignment or some other form of ability to hedge against the two big powers that may go to war and be dragged into one side or the other and essentially lose autonomy and control, which is what they don't want to lose, then that is a prevailing view in Southeast Asia. In Korea, in Japan, in Australia, you don't really have that option. If you have aligned so closely with the United States because we are the best hope for them to maintain a balance of power that preserves their interests and values. If they really want to deviate sharply from that, that would be, going back to Alexandre's point, that would be radical transformation of a foreign policy. And while there are some members of the liberals in the National Assembly who may want to do that, I don't believe Lee Jae-myung is that kind of transformational character, unless he's thrust into it. I mean, he could adapt if that's where the world takes him. That's different. But I don't think he's going to be leading Korea to sort of sever the alliance, and that means he's going to have to go along with President Trump on some issues. And I think I've been arguing, and I wrote a report recently about the need for strategic alignment, anticipating Lee Jae-myung coming to power and dealing with this more transactional and more assertive second Trump administration from the first. And I think they really need to early on move toward some deal making on the economic and technology side, but deal making on the security side in areas where they can find mutual agreement and that they can sell it mutually. That's not every issue. And I've given them a list of 5 security and 5 economic issues, and there are others, and not all of them are going to come to fruition, but there is a rich menu around which there could be a deepening of U.S.-Korean relations that is meaningful to the Trump administration and to the United States, and yet still very much be beneficial and a win-win for Korea, U.S. But at the same time, because I don't want to be Pollyannish about this, there are also some deep, sharp fissures that are meant to, that could easily be widened, and our people who don't mean us well are trying to widen those fissures, including some in various internal politics within both countries. And I think that's where we have to worry about. We have to manage, and that's where I believe the Lee Jae-myung Trump administration, they're going to have to get along at a high level. So they need to build some rapport. And that is possible. We were talking before this program about, this isn't the first time we've seen, a liberal and conservative matchup between our two governments, and we've always survived. In fact, we've always done pretty well despite those sharp political ideological differences internally. And I think right now I'm expecting this to do relatively well. My fear would be if Lee Jae-myung does start to shift away and drift and doesn't really never consolidates the relationship with Trump, that could allow a dangerous drift. And I don't want to see this alliance drift because it sends the wrong message to a lot of people who may take their own policies into their hands. And I'm talking about North Korea, obviously. I'm talking about China. And I worry that they may exploit that situation. I think Lee Jae-myung gets that. I think he will be working hard. And I think the Trump administration will work hard to make sure that we have a South Korea whose industrial, technological, economic vigor is essentially closely lashed up to what the United States is trying to achieve. And I think it will be hopefully understood in South Korea that they really can't be sitting on the fence on this issue. They're not Malaysia, right? I mean, they are a treaty ally. We have troops on the peninsula. If we're going to keep troops on the peninsula, if we're going to keep the nuclear umbrella, if we're going to keep the kind of chorus free trade agreement, all of those depend on improving the relationship, not walking away from it.
Well, Patrick, let me just follow up on that. Very, very excellent points you made. But you mentioned troops, U.S. troops in South Korea. You mentioned the nuclear umbrella, South Korea. You mentioned our mutual defense treaty, going back to the Korean War. So that's very profound, isn't it? So on the issue of Taiwan, would you see, or would you see the Trump administration sort of looking for greater clarity from the Lee Jae-myung government as to supporting the U.S. in regards to a deterrence policy towards China in regards to Taiwan?
The difficulty of American policy to move away from strategic ambiguity is obvious when you contrast President Biden's repeated public pronouncements, not gaffes, but really deliberate announcements that we would defend Taiwan if invaded. But at the same time, there was still significant doubt that the United States actually would do that. So in other words, it didn't allay the strategic ambiguity that exists. Meanwhile, you have the Trump administration that has not been out front talking about clarifying strategic ambiguity. I mean, yes, we do have the Defense Department representing that kind of constant harder line view. The leaked interim guidance that came out a couple of months ago talked about preparing for a Taiwan contingency, and Secretary Hegseth's comments at Shangri-La. He never vowed to actually defend Taiwan, but any fair reading of what he said, saying that there would be catastrophic results and consequences if China used force, that's pretty much saying, we're going to be there. That's why there'll be catastrophic results, is because there'll be a war. But he's still keeping a scintilla of ambiguity. I don't think that means that Washington can put pressure on other allies, including Seoul, to be that clear about supporting Taiwan. But they will be looking for serious defense planning in coordination. We do need to be doing things like what I know is already actually happening, but so I can't really talk about them too much. But we need to be doing wargaming, and we need to be doing the defense planners in Japan and Korea and the United States need to at least have some understanding of what happens if there is a crisis, what happens if there are multi-crises. And I think the Lee Jae-myung government, I hope that they continue to invest in at the working level, at least, and at senior levels of military and defense and security planning for thinking about those things. That's very different from saying that the top level civilian political leadership of our governments, either the president of the United States or the president of South Korea, should be so vocal that they remove the ambiguity. I don't think either one of them will want to do that. I think there will be a tension, though, to try to move President Lee Jae-myung away from some of his previous comments that have essentially trivialized the idea that whether Taiwan is a Korean interest, because I think it is, as so many leaders in Europe and Asia have said, especially in the last 5 years, the cross-strait peace and stability is an international interest. There's just no doubt. I mean, so don't adopt the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Beijing's talking point saying that's none of your business. It's just a domestic issue. Well, yes, it may be domestic, but it also has international repercussions. That's just the reality.
Yes. Thank you so much, Patrick. Alexander.
Hey, again, Patrick, excellent comments. I'm learning every second you're talking, so please talk more. An interesting thought occurred to me. You know, in the past, during presidential elections in South Korea, we would discuss the influence of the so-called northern wind, you know, the alleged interference from North Korea into South Korean domestic politics and presidential elections, and whether they would have their own preferred candidates and what they may or may not have done to kind of advance their causes. This time, for the first time, we haven't heard that, and instead we read a lot of stories about the alleged China's meddling in South Korean presidential elections, which kind of brought to mind, you know, the 4 years of the first Trump administration, which was accused without any ground of having been elected with the help of Russian interference, and of course, you know, all these investigations and prosecutions and all these bogus claims really changed the dynamics during the first Trump 4 years, and had a tremendous impact on our domestic politics, on the foreign policy of the first President Trump. So my question to you is very simple. I mean, these accusations of China's meddling and allegedly supporting President Lee, I mean, is it a real issue, or is it another effort to demonize the president-elect, kind of portray him as being Xi Jinping's stooge, with an effort to basically shape the domestic policy agenda, restrict his foreign policy choices in the next 5 years by the conservatives? Should we dismiss it at all, or is it more consequential, and there's a risk that we might see like a deja vu of what happened in American politics during the first Trump administration, kind of replaying in South Korea now, but of course related to China and all that? So, or in your opinion, is it just really a fluke, insignificant, and we should focus on bigger issues? You mentioned Taiwan, strategic flexibility, overall tensions in U.S.-China relationship as shaping South Korean kind of approach and policy towards China, and not these China meddling, China election interference accusations. What do you think?
Well, let me start with the positive that, you know, the Koreans keep bouncing back from impeachments and showing how democracies can work. And I think that's a very positive reminder that our democratic system it can be a superior way of making our political differences, working through our political differences and reaching government by the people. But at the same time, modern technology is calling into question in the minds of so many people in democracies whether we can make sure that our elections are indeed free and fair and that they're not tampered with. And so those forces are essentially clashing right now. And both in America and in South Korea, we've seen a lot of people just don't trust the institutions of the elections. And if we go back to the martial law, you know, botched, martial law, 6 hours of martial law decision in December, the President Yoon tried to justify it on the idea that it was the election commission who had been penetrated, and it needed to be essentially taken over and seized and investigated. I don't have the information to say that there was none of that happened. But it doesn't seem to me that, well, first of all, I know that martial law was not the answer to that problem. I mean, if it was, you know, there are institutions that you can do that without martial law to investigate it. But at the same time, it didn't seem like that was really the obvious problem. It is though a fear. It's a growing fear. You know, going back to the first Trump election and Russia's interference, the question of, you know, social media. There was no doubt that Russians Russian influencers amplified messages that Americans were already putting out. For instance, Chinese do the same thing. So this is sort of social media, amplification of different messages. It's we call it narrative warfare, but it's not necessarily the going after. It's not trying to. It's not a color revolution. It's not trying to bring down the government. There are things in between, obviously, with North Korea on cyber, on money, on corruption. Same thing with China, Russia. I mean, there are things that happen in the gray zone. We know that. We've all worked in worlds where we know there are a lot of nefarious things going on. The question is, do they amount to a serious challenge to the democratic institutions? And so far, not yet. That's the good news. But don't sit on your laurels. Democracies. This is a constant work to try to fend back. That's why both parties had, they've outlawed fake deep fakes in the Korean election, was because they are aware that this could be used by foreign entities to manipulate the election. But we all face this problem. What is truthful? What's being said? Who's saying what? And I do think that it's the voters in our democracies. We have to make sure that they feel that their vote is going to count, and that the votes will be counted fairly, and that the outcome will be known. I think in this case, this election was sort of a foregone conclusion. Once the martial law happened, essentially it was the Democratic Party's race to lose, because people just wanted something different from martial law. And so you saw the natural cleavage there only grow toward the liberals on this election, not because more people became liberal, but because more people just wanted to move away from anything that was associated with the martial law taint. I think the election fairness and manipulation issue is not going away. I think we're living in an information era, a technological era, that China, North Korea, independent non-state actors have greater potential to influence and send their influence around, and we send our influence to them. It's interesting that President Trump has tried to make a big stand on sort of, we're no longer going to meddle in other countries. And the United States obviously has been seen as the biggest meddler by many countries in their internal affairs. If you're an American, many of you are saying, yeah, that's good, because we're trying to project American democracy and values. Others say that's terrible because you're interfering with the internal affairs. And I think we need to go back and think about what we do abroad more carefully, rather than just assume that we've done in the past is the right thing. And meanwhile, South Korea, they need to figure out how do they protect their democratic system from interference, because technologies will allow other actors around the world to tamper with it. And it is a legitimate issue. The question is, if you have polarized politics, can you trust the two major parties to come together and fix the problem? So how do you fix these issues? It's a problem that's here to stay right now, and we don't have a monopoly on this. Again, I come back to where I started. Hey, South Korea has just gone through a second impeachment successfully and had a democratic election, and apparently it'll be hopefully violence free, and I think that in itself is a testament to the democratic process.
I couldn't agree with you more, Patrick. I think South Korea is really the model. I mean, model for all countries as a true democracy and a vibrant democracy, a resilient democracy. So I totally agree with your comments. Let me pivot a bit to North Korea, because you did mention North Korea and in your opening comments about looking at the United States and South Korea as their principal enemies. We see North Korea now with the Mutual Defense Treaty with the Russian Federation. We see North Korean troops, over 11,000, and in Russia, Kursk. We see, at least the reporting is, that Russia is providing North Korea with significant upgrades to their nuclear missile programs. And also we see, in addition to troops, North Korea providing Russia with the artillery shells, the ballistic missiles, and other weaponry necessary to continue with the war in Ukraine. I think back to the Second World War. We just had the 80th anniversary of the end of the Second World War, and the 50 million, when you think of the numbers of civilians and troops who died in that war. I mean, it's catastrophic. So I guess my question is this, Patrick. You know, we all were involved in initial negotiations with North Korea, and this started in 1994 with the agreed framework and Jimmy Carter meeting with Kim Il-sung, and then taking it to the six-party talks, where we had an agreement where they would denuclearize comprehensively, verifiably, but then the hiccup was the highly enriched uranium program that they were not revealing. But I have to wonder about this. North Korea has always been looking towards the United States as a country that they wanted to engage with, wanted to have a good relationship with, etc. And now, when I think back to very contemporary developments like the Mutual Defense Treaty with the Russian Federation, etc., I have to wonder, did we do something wrong? What did we miss? And is that of concern to the people in South Korea? The sense you get from reading the media is basically a good percentage of the South Korean people really aren't overly concerned about the security issues with North Korea. Well, I would be very concerned, especially now with a Kim Jong-un who's emboldened because of his very unique relationship with President Putin and with Xi Jinping, and to include Iran in that axis of authoritarian states and so forth. I would be concerned. So, two questions. One, did we miss something? How did it go this way? And two, why is there a sense that the people in South Korea are somewhat complacent about, or not complacent, but less concerned about the threat from North Korea?
Well, that's a big topic. You know, it is a fascinating history of the Korean Peninsula, and we've all studied it. I think the United States in general has approached the Korean Peninsula within its sort of global political framework, geopolitical framework, not as kind of on the ground in Korea, even though we've had so many Americans on the ground come through Korea, learn Korean, and work so closely with the Koreans. And we've had a profound relationship in South Korea. But the relationship started because post World War II, and the war hasn't ended in Asia 80 years ago yet, right? We're not quite to the 80th anniversary of the end of the war in Asia, but we're almost there. But that's also when you know, the brief sort of end of the Japanese occupation leads to a divided peninsula and a Cold War standoff between the U.S. and Soviet Union, and then Kim Il-sung finding opportunities, especially after Stalin's death, to really burrow in a more independent North Korean government and play China and Russia off one another, the Soviet Union then. And he would love, yes, Kim Jong-un today would love to be able to add America to the mix of that multi-alignment as well, because it gives him more leverage as a middle power to play big powers off one another and to get more largesse and better protection. We are, of course, and should be very concerned by the deepening defense relationship between Moscow and Pyongyang. Repeated U.S. defense officials have in the past few months made clear that the technology flow from Moscow to Pyongyang is significant. We don't see that publicly so much. We see bits of it, but they're ahead of us in terms of what they know, and they're saying it's significant. And I think that's something we need to be watching very closely, because there are two things I worry about on North Korea's emboldenment, and especially if we end up with a weaker U.S.-Korean alliance for some reason. One of them is that North Korea has watched Russia's nuclear taunts and how to use the threat of a tactical nuclear weapon essentially to coerce the NATO allies to back off, essentially, to do less than they might do in terms of protecting Ukraine, and possibly even use a tactical nuclear weapon in certain situations if, say, NATO allies were joining the fight, to scare the West. It might actually be used. At least it's more thinkable now than ever before, really, since a long time in the post-war world. And I think North Korea's watched that, and started developing this tactical nuclear capability. Secondly, now they're watching not just what's happened in Ukraine, but also what's happened that America was kept out of the war, NATO was kept out of the war because of the nuclear threats, and it made the world safe for conventional warfare. We saw a glimpse of that in the India-Pakistan skirmish that happened, just last month, when, unlike 2019, when the fighting was kept toward terrorism, counterterrorism, this one escalated to conventional targets deeper in Pakistan. And while it maybe never came close to escalating to a nuclear confrontation between those two nuclear powers in Islamabad and New Delhi, it seemed to make it clear that, hey, nuclear powers can make this world safe for conventional war. So if you're Taiwan, you are worried that China may get that lesson too, or that Kim Jong-un may get that lesson. Now, we don't see any real signs of that yet. I mean, the idea, except that's what Kim seems to be working on right now in terms of he's giving more attention to his conventional forces. Now that he's sort of had to restart his factories to help arm Russia with ammunition and artillery and rockets, he's also looking at his Navy and his Air Force and other sort of non-nuclear forces. Now, he's got a long way to go. He doesn't have a strong economy to do that. So we have to be careful about projecting too much power in that direction. But you could start to see that he might be preparing for that pathway that one day maybe he could eventually consolidate the peninsula under North Korean rule. That's if you do nothing. Now, if South Korea does nothing, then, well, maybe they deserve to be overrun. If the United States doesn't help, then maybe they deserve to be overrun. I don't think that's what Kim wants to do, but I'm just saying that he has a system. There's a system in Pyongyang that's just very different from the South Korean system. And these are now two different places, and unification is further away rather than closer, despite the fact that they're all Korean people, and despite the fact that they have still interfamily sort of histories that are rich. And I think that Lee Jae-myung will try to get back to inter-Korean relations being on the agenda, but it's going to take some compromise from North Korea, because North Korea has dug in so deeply over these last 2 years. Did we do something wrong? Did South Korea do something wrong? Well, we could point a lot of fingers, in terms of saying what if history. But it always took two to tango here, and I think there's always been this Cold War dynamic that has essentially been perpetuated, that is different from, if we had only been thinking about how to improve the Korean peninsula, as opposed to we have to concern ourselves with big power confrontation in conflict. I should shut up because I know we're running out of time here.
Okay, we are, but I'm going to ask a very quick one, and then over to you, Alexander. Lee Jae-myung, how do you see him approaching North Korea? In a few sentences, Patrick, we hear so much about Korea passing that President Donald Trump may be reaching out to Kim Jong-un. Do you see Lee Jae-myung reaching out to Kim Jong-un and trying to effect some sort of a dialogue?
I can see President Trump wanting to go back and replay the Singapore summit, and therefore, before he got to Hanoi, try to go back to some basics and put in a larger political peace sort of understanding before you start to get to the specific problems of the nuclear issues. I think Lee Jae-myung would love that in general, and he would try to probably reinforce and revamp and revise the inter-Korean agreements that have all been torn down and raised by the North Koreans. But that's not an easy thing to fix right now, and you can't do that quickly. But you could change the atmospherics quickly. You just can't change the substance quickly.
Right.
That's going to take a long time. You've written about this. It's a long road ahead to actually make the change, but you could signal change quickly.
Yes, excellent. Please, Alexander.
Yes, President-elect Lee will be inaugurated tomorrow on Wednesday no waiting period, no 2 months to transfer power because of the special nature of this election. So his team will get going from tomorrow, actually, making important decisions. And my question is simple. Who are these people around him who will advise him on critical foreign policy and national security decisions? Clearly, some of them lean towards the United States, hold pro-American views, but I hear that there are some who are leaning towards China and hold so-called pro-Beijing views. So could you, for our audience, mention a few names, people you would recommend that we watch very closely, what they do, what they say, and how they may influence President Lee in the days and months to come?
I was just going to say that there is a short list of names who could be his national security advisor, could be his foreign minister. A lot of them are drawn from his friends in the National Assembly. There's a division between the Lee Jae-myung wing and, say, Moon Jae-in's wing of the liberals. And so it's interesting to see some of the people who worked in the Moon Jae-in government may come into Lee Jae-myung, but he has some clear differences too. And so some of the people we're going to be watching are people who are working in academia, working in government, working in law, more than, say, business, coming into his cabinet probably right away. I don't want to start speculating specific names, only because we're going to start to hear these names from Korea, I think, in the hours to come. And I just don't want to get it wrong, and I don't want to preempt what he's going to say.
Okay.
No, that's a good response, Patrick. Patrick, I think we're running out of time here. We didn't really drill down on domestic issues, the economy, manufacturing, jobs, et cetera, certainly tariffs and so forth. Do you have 1 or 2 sentences on the domestic economy that you would like to share with our viewers and audience?
Well, you mentioned housing, for instance, being a pernicious problem. I mean, the demographics of Korea is an ongoing problem for any political party, but it's the economic growth for the middle class and welfare for the lower middle class in South Korea, who are hoping that the shift from conservative to liberal will mean better sort of economic prospects for them. We'll see whether that materializes, because Lee Jae-myung is going to have the economic growth of the entire country moving forward, because it's sluggish. And for the world's 13th largest economy in a very competitive world, you can't afford to go toward a sluggish direction. You want to revive it. And so he's going to be looking for some, I think, big deals, but then he's going to have to also provide more welfare for his constituents who just voted for him.
Thank you, Patrick. What an outstanding session. Your views, your commentary, just right on the mark. Thank you so much. Michael, over to you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Another very important program as we see the election of Lee Jae-myung unfolding. Thank you, Dr. Cronin, for your insights, and we will welcome you back soon. And Dr. Mansourov, you always have insights that no one else has, very accurate and very stimulating. The run-up to the election by Andrew Salmon, our bureau chief in Korea and Asia, had some very interesting comments. One was that the former ambassador to Russia, Sung-lak Wee Sun-lak, he has a history of saying that America is key to Korea. And he also made a statement yesterday in the Times that he doesn't think that we're going to see this strong leaning towards China at all. And I don't think, I think there are things of concern, but we all saw during the Moon Jae-in administration, America was very much able to work together with the Republic of Korea. So we have hopes there. But thank you, Dr. Cronin. Look forward to our next time together. And thank you, everybody, for our program. Thank you to the Washington Times, which will cover this program. And thank you, all of our audience. Thank you.
This webcast is pre-recorded. you.